Hi everybody, welcome back. Today I'm going to be telling you all about everything I read in October and talking you through, and I'm using this term pretty loosely, recent releases in speculative fiction. I initially conceived of that for mostly just Substack, but then I was like, why would I not share them here as well? So it's 8 books in total from about the last year or so, and I've been reading these, I think probably I would say since about August, so didn't read them all in October. If this is your first time watching one of these, hello, I'm Jess. I've been reviewing books online for donkey's years in internet terms, amongst other things, reading across a wide range of genres, so from literary stuff to classics to speculative fiction, always looking for high quality literature, so stuff that has artistic merit. I'd quite like them to be entertaining as well, as all truly great novels should be. That's me in a nutshell. Later Me is popping in, so apologies if there's lighting changes or whatever else, but I am interviewing one of my very favourite authors, Jeff VanderMeer, on Tuesday the 26th of November, so in a few days time from when you're seeing this video probably, at 7 PM UK time GMT, and we'll be talking about his new novel Absolution, which is the 4th novel in the Southern Reach trilogy, which I guess is no longer a trilogy. I, as you can imagine, am extremely excited about this. Looking forward to sharing it with you all. If you are a member of Patreon Book Club or have a paid subscription to the Substack, you can reserve your place for free with like a code system, which you'll be able to access once you're a member of either of them. So if you've been thinking about one of those subscriptions and you'd also like to attend the interview, now might be a good time to combine both things. Or you can purchase a standalone ticket as well, and I'll leave a link to that down below. If you can't attend at that specific time but you would still like to watch it back, you don't need to reserve a place or get a ticket if you're an existing, as I say, paid subscriber to the Substack or an existing Patreon book club member. I will give you the link basically after the interview. So yeah, you don't have to go through the Eventbrite system. But if you're not part of either of those, but you would still like to watch it back afterwards, I will be sending the link out to anyone with a ticket to the Eventbrite event. I hope that makes sense. I will leave the details down below. I really hope some of you can join. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope we can do more stuff like this in the future. But yeah, for now, let's get into the books. I read a lot digitally, so obviously you can see my pile back there, and we will talk about some of those, but the first book I wanted to talk about was actually from my speculative fiction roundup. And I want to talk about it first because I love it and I really want you to read it. And that is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. So this is what I would truly think of myself as literary speculative fiction. This is a fantastic example of it. You know, it's clever, it's challenging, it's layered, it's got some great themes going on. It's also got all the stuff from epic fantasy, which is the speculative genre it's based in, that make it entertaining, that make it visually impressive, and, you know, keep you reading. It is a perfect mashup of the two, and I loved it. I think it's easily going in my top books of the year. It's exactly why I kind of specifically read in these genres to find books like this. I think it was well received, mostly within the genre and in some more kind of mainstream reviewing channels as well, but not hyped enough in my opinion. It's been out in America for a while. I think it came out here maybe this year, or maybe it came out in paperback this year, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's quite a difficult novel to explain because it has got all these layers to it. So we start in the perspective of the body of a boy who is listening to his Lola, which is a Filipino term for grandmother, tell stories about the old country. So we are addressed as you. When I say in the perspective, I mean we are literally, the reader is put into his perspective. So we're listening to our Lola. She's telling the story of an inverted world and a love story between the moon and the water, which creates this inverted world. And in the inverted world, there's an inverted theatre, and she tells us that one day we may be called to the theatre to watch a performance in our dream. A story from the old country. You know, she tells lots of stories about the old country. And that is exactly what happened and the form that the book takes. So we are then put into this dream world, inverted theatre, to watch a performance, to watch a play. And there's like all these different layers going on. So Sometimes we'll slip into the perspective whereby Lola is telling us the story of the inverted theatre with the performance inside it. Sometimes we're inside the inverted theatre, experiencing it very much as a performance, and sometimes we're much more immersed in the story on stage, as it were. So this is a lot of nested narratives, and it certainly does require some work from you as the reader to sort of put it together visually, but I also think Jimenez handles it in a kind of mature and assured manner. I never felt lost or confused. I felt like he knew what he was doing, therefore I felt comfortable. We also get a little bit of the sense of the protagonist, the person whose shoes we're in, their life. They live in a war-torn country. Obviously their family immigrated to this place, wherever it may be. It kind of reads a little bit like World War II, possibly America. But yeah, the main thrust of the narrative, what's going on stage, is about a people, basically, the country rising up and ridding themselves of a despotic imperial regime. And we follow two characters across the country, basically, to help put this in motion. I think it's best to just discover much of that for yourself. What I loved about it is that Jimenez really immerses himself in the theatre concept. So, for example, we might come across a minor incidental character along the path, along the journey, and he uses chorus to give us that character's internal monologue. This helps give depth to the world and a sense of kind of collective storytelling, but also once we get into the scenes proper, we have more conventional dialogue, so it's not something that becomes too gimmicky or overused. And there's lots of little elements like that which keep that performance feeling. The novel really feels like an experience. It really feels propulsive. It really feels vivid and immersive, especially once you kind of get to grips with the style of it. I described it in my review, and I know people instantly switched off when I said this, but like a very literary Mad Max Fury Road. And I was very vindicated because I then went and watched an interview that Jimenez did where he talked about loving that feeling, that kind of that propulsive narrative feeling that the film has, kind of constantly being on the move, and always moving towards a destination. I think the book really captures that, so I'm glad to know that it actually was an inspiration. And I know that's gonna put the fear into some of you who think that does not sound like my kind of thing. First of all, if you haven't watched the film, you should at least try it. I love that film. I really love that film. I don't tend to like action films at all, to be honest. In fact, I don't really love things to feel action-filled, but something about that film and this book handles it in an interesting way. But second of all, yeah, don't let that put you off if it does put you off. I know that for some of you though, that will be like, right, I need to read this book if you loved Mad Max as much as I did. So anyway, I have to describe it like that because it does have that feeling to it. But yeah, as I was going through, as I talked about in my written review, I was just being like, yes, this is what I want in my novels, because we know I like to rail against quite a lot of what's being published at the moment. I don't love what's kind of currently trending in literary fiction that much, and also what's being published in the sci-fi fantasy world, you know, what's being churned out, I might say a lot of it is also pretty subpar. So I'm having problems with like both. So I love when I find not only a crossover novel that kind of has feet in both genres, but one that does it really well. So I just like was ticking it basically, just being like, thank goodness someone is writing a novel like this at the moment. Like there was like, even though I say it's really propulsive, really kind of forward moving, got these kind of big action scenes, it's also got quiet moments, and thus it has that balance. It has that light and shade. And I think the character writing is also really good. There's nuance there. There's real warmth and beauty to how Jimenez writes them. One thing I really loved about it is that sometimes the plot or the dialogue would move in quite an unexpected way. So many genre things, not even necessarily books, but also TV shows, I can just predict the next thing that's going to come out of a character's mouth. And what I really loved about this is that it felt genuinely surprising sometimes, the way that it functions and moves. It's got a dash of the weird in there, just enough to add a little bit of extra something to some of the more traditional epic fantasy things that Jimenez includes, and he obviously loves the genre, which we love to see, but he adds in that little bit of weird. It gives it something extra, it elevates it a little bit. All these moments kind of add to the themes of the book of, imperialism and violence and the power of violence, and a big one is kind of redemption and can one redeem oneself, and shame, and it's also a love story between these two male characters. And I don't read a lot of romance, as we know. I'm not super well versed, but I liked how it progressed, and I can see why Jimenez made some of the choices that he did with it. It's quite violent, by the way, just trigger warning for violence. He writes the violence in, again, an interesting way. Like, he adds some poetry to it, really. In general, it feels quite poetic, but it has like heft to it. It's not just wishy-washy imagery. Like, he's really describing actual active things, but in a poetic way, which we love. So yeah, I would recommend it to my literary readers who don't read a lot in the genre. I really think you might be surprised by this book. I hope you would be, and entertained by it, and also, intrigued by the interesting form that it takes. As I said, it's got those interesting themes as well. I think Jimenez manages his character arcs really well. All the things you would look for in a good literary novel. I do think they're there and wrapped up in this really interesting, fabulous world. And I'd recommend it to my genre readers, of course, who are looking for someone with a craft-oriented approach to the genre. I loved it. I'm going to read whatever he comes out with next, and I really want to read his first novel, Vanished Birds, as well. Another book from my speculative fiction roundup that I really liked was Jonathan Abernathy, You Are Kind, by Molly McGee. So it's about Jonathan Abernathy. He is entrenched in debt from which he will basically never recover. He's in his 20s, his parents have passed away, he's working minimum wage jobs to barely survive. It's all looking pretty disastrous. And then he gets an offer from a company to say he could maybe get forgiveness for his debts if he joins them. And they clean up the dreams of the American public while they're sleeping. So they go into people's dreams, people's subconscious, and extract irritants. Obviously, dream interpretation is pretty subjective, so it doesn't always work out so well. And as you can imagine, all is not quite as it seems, and this is hardly going to be the answer to all of Jonathan Abernathy's problems. So this is a novel of late-stage capitalism. It's about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the head, and I was worried the style would feel gimmicky. It has this 1950s infomercial kind of style, spliced with some self-help book kind of stuff that Jonathan Abernathy has clearly internalised, as well as kind of corporate language as well, as you can imagine. And all of these quite clipped, formal styles add together to create something quite emotional. I mean, I was surprised by how emotionally I felt about it. Jonathan Abernathy, and I have to say his full name every time because that's basically how he's referred to throughout the whole book. Sometimes Abernathy, I think, but refers to himself in the third person, and that's where the title comes from. He has these affirmations like, Jonathan Abernathy, you are kind, you are good, everything will be okay. And unfortunately, well, we know from the first paragraph of the book, everything will not be okay. Yeah, it's modern day Kafkaesque. It's got this sense of just being trapped in this anti-human system, basically. And yeah, we do get some humanity in amongst this. So we follow Abernathy as he starts to make relationships with people like his neighbour, for example, and there's quite a sweet relationship between the two of them and his neighbour's daughter. He tries to make friends at work, and often it's very comical, but I found this to actually, obviously, as good comedy always does, or often does, it heightens the emotions of the piece, because you become more attached to the characters and their foibles and their, difficulties. I think probably it's a touch overlong. It gets a little repetitive in the second half. It will obviously frustrate some readers. Some readers just won't like that style, and also because we spend a lot of time in dreams, which is generally a red flag for me. I don't love dreamscapes. I don't love talking about dreams or being in dreams, but it works here. I think McGee handles it well, for me anyway. But some people won't like that kind of surreal dream logic stuff that happens, and I think sometimes it does lose a little bit of logic, like you're not quite sure what's happening. but I think that's very much intentional. I think it's there to really contrast with that very reserved style, and it worked for me. I was impressed by it. It's her debut, so I look forward to seeing what she will write next. Let's do the book I actually have got a copy of now. By the way, I'm going to get my own copy of those two books. So that's the greatest endorsement that I can think of. I had ARCs of both of them. I will be getting my own copies, my own physical copies for my library. I'm calling it a library now. Right, The Last Warner Woman by Kay Miller. This was our October book club pick, and I liked it. There was lots of things to like about this one. I wish it had been pushed a little bit further. I think it was like 70 to 80% there, but not quite. But this is one of his earlier novels, so I'm really interested to read Augustin, which I've heard great things about. I'm sure he's kind of solved some of the issues that we find in this book in that. So I would put the blurb this way round. So Mr. Writerman is trying to write the story of Adamine Bustamante, and she's born in Jamaica, and she has an unusual childhood and ends up becoming a Warner woman amongst the Jamaican revivalists. So essentially she warns, she predicts the future, prophesies, and she ends up going to live in England, and whilst there finds her warning is not received in anywhere near the same way, and she is institutionalized. So Mr. Writerman is trying to write her story, but he keeps getting interrupted by the protagonist herself, who is quite adamant that he is writing it all wrong, or writing at least some of it wrong. So based on the blurb the book actually has, which you can go and read yourself if you like, I had the feeling that this would be, first of all, more Ada's narrative than Mr. Writerman's, and second of all, more antagonistic in general, and that there would be more difference between the two narratives. But really the whole story arc is one of healing and reconciliation, and I think knowing that going in, you might have an extremely different experience of the storyline, because I was expecting one type of thing where I was kind of going to have to pick apart the two different narratives, and maybe there was going to be some discussion of gender or colonialism across narrative. What I got was quite different from that, and so I think that interfered a little bit with my reading experience. I think at a more intimate level, like a smaller scale, the storytelling's really good here, the voice is really engaging, parts of it are written in Jamaican English. There's a poetry to it, and Miller wrote and writes poetry, but it doesn't fall into the traps that some poet and novelists fall into, where the storytelling isn't good or there isn't enough in that arena. But what came out of our book club discussions was definitely that we just wanted more. It's about 200 and something pages, 240 pages long, and I think we could have just done with loads more. More of Ada's childhood, more of Ada's time with the revivalists and time as a Warner woman in Jamaica, more time in England, more fleshed out time in England. I think the first half for me was more successful. Others, people in book club, had it the kind of other way round, but either way, we all concluded we wanted a bit more in general, which is always a good thing, I think. At least we didn't want less. So yeah, that's Last Warner Woman. I think I'm going to try Augustin. Possibly that's the place to start with Miller's work, and then to go to this one if you're an existing fan of his work. I have read his poetry before as well, which is very good. Next is Living Things by Munir Hachemi, and this one is translated from the Spanish. So this is about 4 young men. They travel from Spain to the south of France with the intention of spending their summer picking grapes and having kind of a romantic summer, doing manual labour. The narrator makes very clear that these men do not have to do this for financial reasons, but are doing this for sort of romantic notion of, you know, having life experience kind of thing. The narrator hopes, who's also called Munir, hopes to get a novel out of it, and there's a lot of class dynamics even between the men as well. Unfortunately, when they get there, the vineyards have been wiped out basically by unseasonal torrential rains, and so that job is not an offer. But they can vaccinate chickens or wring the necks of chickens or fatten up ducks all of which are obviously much more kind of horrifying industrial level farming stuff, and the disjunct between the summer they imagined they'd have and the summer they actually have, and the way that it begins to take a toll on their mental health brings out some of the horror of this book, the kind of psychological horror of this book, and the unravelling, certainly of the narrator's mind. I thought the first parts were really, really good. They had this kind of self-reflexive, I'm telling the story as if it weren't a story, as if it were true. What does it mean to tell a true story? How does narrative work? All this stuff that really interests me. Just kind of wish that had been maintained throughout, but I just don't think that promise was quite borne out through the whole book. Again, this is obviously a novel of late stage capitalism. It's a novel about climate change. It's a novel about, what we do to the animals that we eat and industrial farming. And it's also a novel about narrative. It's also a novel about the novelization, the fictionalization of these themes, morality involved in that. Like, what does it mean to write about this? Can you truly communicate the true horror of a situation like this? So in general, I thought it was a really good, kind of very promising, again, debut novel. I thought it was slightly too long, probably. It could have been shortened down again, especially in that second half. Or it could have been expanded with tiny bit more plot. Because obviously we have to get a sense of the monotony of these men's days, but that's such a hard balance to strike. And I think it can be done in fewer words. But in conclusion, I will definitely be reading whatever he writes next. And I think Hachemi really does capture, again, something of the now. This is a good book, a good version of a book of the now. Again, going to purchase my own copy. Next, The Extinction of Irena by Jennifer Croft. Jennifer Croft is a veteran translator. I think she translates in Spanish and Polish and maybe something else as well. Into English. And this novel, I feel like you're going to most enjoy it if you are very immersed in the literature space and kind of aware of all the sillinesses that proliferate in some of the more pretentious areas of the space. And I think Croft is kind of making fun of herself a little bit. I don't know how you would receive it if you weren't as familiar with some of those things. So it's about 8 translators, I think, who only translate this one author, Irena. She's Polish. She lives in Biała forest. I hope I'm pronouncing that not too awfully, which is on the Polish-Belarusian border. And she invites her precious translators to her home every now and then to sit down and translate her latest work, kind of away from the prying eyes of everybody else, away from outside opinions, potential reviewers, and they translate there together. And it's kind of a little cult-like. Only this time they're invited there to translate the latest book, and Irena disappears, sending them into frenzy. And they become like headless chickens. They start running around, getting into all sorts of mischief, and it's got this framed narrative whereby one of the other translators is apparently translating the main body of the work by another of them, both in this group. And so she adds these little kind of funny footnotes, which reminded me again of other books that we see that kind of thing in, like Shriek by Jeff VanderMeer, and is not dissimilar to what, say, The Last Born Woman is doing. So there's that element going on. I think the forest is a perfect place for Croft to examine some of the themes that she's examining at the same time and in a kind of interlinked way, because she's on the one hand looking at translation, the power of translation, and the role of translation and some of its difficulties, and then she's also looking at climate change and, again, the power dynamics, political, ecological, that are involved in that. So it's very much about power, I would say, and who gets to tell what story, and who gets precedence. But yeah, it's utter chaos. It's literary chaos, but I think Croft is really saying quite a lot of really fascinating, interesting things about translation, about writing, about climate change, and how the three intersect. So whilst I didn't enjoy every single minute of reading it, I did feel satisfied in that respect, and so I admire it as well, and overall recommend it. Again, I'll be getting my own copy. Next we have a book which I don't think I am going to bother getting my own copy of. I believe I read it from the library, but that is The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert, or Kolbert. And this is non-fiction. It's about the current mass extinction that we are living through, the human-engineered mass extinction. Kolbert kind of compares it to previous mass extinctions that have gone by. Extremely depressing subject matter. And it takes the form of quite a lot of these books. So in each chapter, she focuses on a particular species that is either going extinct or is extinct. She talks to scientists, like on the front lines of these extinctions, and, you know, tells a little story in each chapter, basically. And I learned some interesting things from this book. I learned some interesting things about past mass extinctions, about current extinctions, but in general, I found it to be strangely ambivalent in terms of the point she was making. Now, this won the Pulitzer in 2014, so very different environment to even now, you know, 10 years later, to be writing about this. And now I think a lot of us are quite familiar with the idea that we are living through another mass extinction that we have caused. So it's possible that it doesn't have the same effect on me because I kind of already know some of the stuff that she was talking about, and then maybe that is the point. But yeah, core problem being, when you start comparing our mass extinction that we've caused to older mass extinctions, like, what kind of question are you asking? Like, are you saying that actually maybe it's okay because animal populations will recover in some respect at some point? I don't think she is saying that, but I think you'd have to read it to understand sort of what I'm saying, that there does seem to be like an ambivalence there. Like, she kind of points to the fact that ours is unique in a number of ways and that it's going to make the world worse, but it's not very persuasive. Like, in that respect, it was an odd read, I would say. I obviously know, like, I should know that already, and I don't need it to be persuasively argued to me, but still, I kind of want to feel like Kolbert has real skin in the game herself, especially as she's, you know, writing about climate change. She's writing about this sort of thing consistently. So yeah, it ended up feeling like the kind of book you might pat yourself on the back for reading, saying, you know, I read a book about mass extinctions, but not the kind of book that would move you to action. Do you know what I mean? It was fine. I wouldn't say it was a must read. I think there's probably better books talking about this stuff out there. Okay, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. I think I've been meaning to read this for like the last 3 Halloweens. This is the definitive Halloween novel, and you may remember I read Dandelion Wine over the summer and really liked it. Unfortunately, I did not like this one anywhere near as much. First of all, though, we have to talk about Bradbury's prose because it's just insane. I kind of love it. I mean, he really goes for it. He really hazards something. He really tries something and sort of doesn't seem to care whether he looks silly or not, or whether it's well reviewed or not. Like, this is how he wants to write and he writes that way. That's really the overwhelming feeling I get from his novels. And I love that, I admire it. And sometimes it just absolutely works and you have like a sentence which you just think, this is so good. And I wrote down so many quotes. I also wrote down quite a few quotes of just absolute howlers, just where it goes way too far that it's almost comical. So we love that about Bradbury, and I want to read The Martian Chronicles. This is about 2 boys. A carnival arrives on the edge of their town. So it's set nominally in the same town as Dandelion Wine, which is Greentown in Illinois, fictional place. And this carnival arrives on the edge of town just a few days before Halloween. And they go and they manage to piss off the owners of the carnival, the, you know, showrunners, carnival runners, I don't know. And so they, you know, they start being pursued all over town by Mr. Dark, who, yeah, wants to trap them within the carnival forever, basically. So I think it's best compared to Dandelion Wine to see like why it doesn't work as well. First of all, there's less light and shade, there's less balance here. So in Dandelion Wine, I loved how it was like a weird mishmash of genres. Whereas this one, we don't get as much of that soft, gentle, quiet coming of age part. We also get the one weird thing, which is the carnival, which I don't think we spend enough time at. And it seems to only have 2 attractions which we're going to spend any time with. I wish like he'd created more of the carnival. Whereas in Dandelion Wine, there's like lots of weird things going on, which is kind of fun and slightly more unusual and feels more unsettling to me as a result. This one, the level of hysteria just rises throughout the book. As I say, there's no like quiet. It doesn't like drop to give that more balanced feeling. The characterization of the boys, I'm not saying that Doug of Dandelion Wine is, you know, the most fleshed out character in the world, but certainly it feels more two-dimensional in this book for both boys. Like, one is just so good and the other is, you know, beset by darkness kind of thing. So I don't know if it's maybe even the contrast between the two just doesn't work quite as well. It's mostly a novel about a middle-aged man having a crisis. Didn't expect that. And there's too little plot for how long it goes on. Like, sometimes moments are just dragged out for too long. But there are some kind of wickedly atmospheric parts of this book. It just wasn't maintained throughout. I think it's worth reading like the first few pages at Halloween, see if you like it, go with it. If you're thinking, is it really going to be like this for 250 pages? I'm not sure I can take it. The answer is yes. And then put it back down again. That's my recommendation. You should read Dandelion Wine, but I'm not so sure about this one. Quick poetry interlude. I read this anthology for a million years, for like 18 months, and I really liked it. So this is Being Alive, edited by Neil Astley, who has edited lots and lots of anthologies. And it's basically intended as an anthology for people that are not super familiar with contemporary poetry. Whilst I'm familiar with poetry from my school days, I read a lot of, you know, World War II and back. I haven't read as much contemporary poetry, so it was nice. Basically, this did exactly what I wanted to do, which was give me a long list of poets to go and look up and have some familiarity with and find the collections of. And I think it would totally work for people that don't read a lot of poetry. I mean, a lot of this is very accessible, very, very beautiful poems, and yeah, I really recommend it. Or as a gift for someone that, you know, doesn't read a lot of poetry or wants to read more poetry but you're not sure where to start. Okay, Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. This looks unread because I listened to it. And I would recommend people listen to it in general. It's a good audiobook. So this is great commercial historical fiction. It's not got the things you would expect from a more literary mode, kind of in prose style or theming or any of that more layered stuff, but Follett's a good storyteller, and especially, as I say, on audio it comes across well. It is set in 12th century England, and we have Mason Tom Builder who just has this dream of building a cathedral, and then we have Philip, who's the prior of Kingsbridge, who also would like to bring new life to his priory, his town, whatever. So they both have dreams of building a cathedral, and they come together and they build this cathedral against all odds, and the whole book is about how, you know, how it gets built, even when all forces seem to be against them. It's not a real cathedral, by the way. I was under the impression it was a real cathedral, at least accurate to that extent, for quite some time before I realised there is no Kingsbridge Cathedral. Anyway, as I say, good storytelling. Good on audio, particularly because it is very detailed and quite slow. I didn't find it to be slow overall because we do move from sort of flashpoint of action to flashpoint of action, but certainly in each moment of action there's a lot of detail. So it was very good for me on audio, but if my attention wandered it would be okay because I would still know what was going on. However, couple of problems. Major one being not so great for the women in the book. There's some pretty graphic sexual assault scenes, so be aware. They start in the beginning of the book, but I would certainly say I didn't like the second half of the book more, because the second half of the book really seemed to be about wrecking the main female character's life over and over again, including sexual assault, including this, that and the other. It was written in the 80s by a dude that mostly wrote thrillers, so not super surprising that it's not a feminist masterpiece. Be wary of that. Another thing is, I don't know how you all feel, but when I have a generational story, I'm so much less interested in the second generation of characters, like the Nepo babies of characters. I want you to give me like a really good reason why we're following them beyond they were this character's kid. I find that to be a thing across quite a lot of books. Anyway, I did not have to Google it to know that this was not historically accurate, okay? I've read enough of my other historical fiction to know that this is not historically accurate, nor does it give you like a real feeling of the period. We don't get that like little monotonous daily life stuff that I really love in my historical fiction that really like puts me in it. It is a story. It's just a story. I don't know if I just moved and had to change the battery and the memory card. It's a story designed to entertain. I think that's why it remains popular. I think that's why people continue to love it. So yeah, I recommend if you're looking for that kind of thing, if you're looking for like a long summer read or something that's not going to challenge you too much. I almost want to talk about these two together because I feel like they're very much friends, literary friends. This is A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enriquez. This is her newest collection. She's sort of increasingly beloved Argentine author who writes a lot of literary horror short stories, and she also wrote a novel which came out a few years ago called Our Share of Night. I haven't read any of her other short stories. I have gathered that I think the first two collections might be better, maybe. But anyway, we'll talk more about that in a minute. And I DNF'd Our Share of Night a while ago, perhaps controversially, because I know lots of people love it. And then we've got The Secret Life of Insects by Bernardo Esquinca, who is a Mexican author, I believe. So with this one, what I liked about it, I could see that Esquinca is like a student of this genre, reads in it, watches in it, like speculative literary horror. I could see that he knew stuff about it. There's a Thomas Ligotti references throughout. I'm sure there's a John Crowley reference, or it's very coincidental. These are a mix of stories, some of which, of course, with any collection, some are stronger than others. I really like the title story, which is about an entomologist investigating his wife's death, a forensic entomologist. There were other ones there was one called Jimenez, I think it's called, where 4 friends are at a high school reunion together and sort of dance around this traumatic event that happened in their past. I liked Pan's Noontide, which I didn't really expect to like because I don't love when like ancient gods or whatever are included in contemporary fiction, but I thought it was done really well here. There were a few that I enjoyed, some that I enjoyed less. As I've been talking about recently, I find it hard to like absolutely love horror. Same with short stories, really. I mean, a short story collection has to be really, really good for me to absolutely love it. I don't know that these will like stick with me for a long time. Oh, there's another good one, a kind of classic creepy story about like a spelunker, hitchhiker that a group of people pick up on the road. But yeah, in general, they were very solid, very readable, good for the season I was in October, obviously, and perhaps one to add to your list for October. And there are some interesting themes here. These aren't just for entertainment. There are, Esquinca is exploring various different things, whether it be trauma, whether it be writing, quite a lot about writing and fiction. But yes, if you are a fan of Mariana Enriquez and you want more stories like hers, then I think I would definitely recommend this one. Then we have Enriquez's collection, which I really enjoyed. I think she does, and I don't know if this is a translation thing as well, but I think she captures like voice a little bit better. I was talking a little bit recently about storytelling and what I think makes a good story. It's really hard to pin down, but I think we all know it when we see it. But I think voice is a really big part of it. Having like a distinctive narrative voice. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be like in first person or second person or anything, but like having something distinctive about it. Perhaps these were a little stronger on voice. I think also they were a bit more overtly political. So particularly when she touches on women's issues or, encroaching fascism, or fascism that is here, or something like that. Like each story more or less had something like that. And again, there were a few that I liked in this one, a few that definitely had that sort of uncanny spooky feeling. I liked My Sad Dead. I liked the title story, which is based on like a real crime. I liked Metamorphosis, which is about the metamorphosis of an older woman, something we don't see that much. Some were a little bit more run-of-the-mill, creepy stories. But yes, again, don't know that they will stick with me for a long time, but if you like them, you like them, you already know that you like them. I will definitely be trying some of her earlier stories and her earlier collections just to see what it's like if they're different. Okay, the next book is called Prophet. It's by Blaché and Helen Macdonald, co-authored. And this was my speculative fiction roundup. It is sci-fi, I would say. We open with an American diner has appeared suddenly in the English countryside, and an intelligence agency, can't remember exactly which one, calls in this person, Mr. Rao, who is British Indian. He has been languishing in prison for something that he's done in the past, obviously, and of anything he sees or hears, he can work out whether that thing is true. So if you make a statement, he can tell whether the statement is true or false. Or it also applies to things. So when he sees this American diner, he thinks of it as false. It is not real somehow. It is not true. So yeah, he has this special talent and he is assigned to work out what's happening here. How did this American diner get to be here? And he's assigned his old handler type person who is an American called Adam. So the opening's really atmospheric. We have little touches of the weird, which I love, and always kind of add a little bit of extra interest to it. It's clear that both authors really know the genre, really enjoy the genre, and are writing almost nostalgically in this mode. And it was a fun experiment for the two of them. Particularly because Helen Macdonald, for instance, has written like a nature memoir before, like H's for Hawk. So this is slightly unexpected from them. Blaché, I think, writes in the genre more often. But yeah, I think you can tell they had fun doing this book. And yeah, there's lots of potential in the concept. I like the concept. I like the central theme, which is nostalgia. They explore it in a fairly interesting way. Something about this book is off. More obvious issues with the book. It's too long. Way too long. way too long. A lot of meandering through the middle section. And also, and I find this to be true of a not insubstantial subsection of speculative fiction, but why are we always in the most boring, institutional, bureaucratic, administrative spaces in these novels which have like a really good concept and could go somewhere really fun with it, and then we end up in like offices, corridors, motels. I just don't know why you would languish in these places for long periods of time in the book when you're writing in a genre where you could be doing anything you like. Like I kind of get it because it's like military coded, which again I tend not to like very much anyway, so that was another sort of issue, but that's a me problem. And like, you know, they're liaising with intelligence agencies, whatever. But oh my goodness, take me out of these boring spaces, please. This is not why I read these books. We do get a quite climactic and sort of visually impressive ending, but it takes us so long to get there. But yeah, my main problem I think was the characters and like the author's relationship with the characters. I felt like they loved them too much. I feel like they talked a little bit about how fandom and fanfiction informed this novel and the characterization and the romance plot. And I can see it, first of all. That's very obvious. But also, I suppose that's just not what I'm looking for in my literature. Like, I don't want you to create characters that I'm supposed to cry over and love and create fanfiction about. I want you to create characters that are humans, that are nuanced human beings. Not there just to tug at my heartstrings, because then, you know, I resist it. You know, it's like when someone tells you what to do and you immediately want to do the exact opposite. Like, that's how I felt reading this. I don't read a lot of fan fiction. I don't read any. And it's just not my kind of thing anyway, so I think, you know, that element obviously didn't work for me. But it's interesting, it's a really interesting combination in this specific book, because we obviously have Helen Macdonald, who's known for their like more poetic nature writing, and we have Blaché, kind of coming together. I think you can sometimes feel a little bit of the contrast of styles, not like too much, but it's definitely there. And then we have these slightly more sort of intellectual leanings, I suppose, with it, in that we get quite like a theory-based approach to nostalgia. We get some philosopher name dropping, and we get some more poetic sections. Not poetic, but like, you know, the prose style is more elevated than you would see in other genre fiction. But then we have this quite run-of-the-mill, I quite like sentimental stuff, but overly sentimental approach to character and plot and romance plot. So the combination is unusual, and I think it'll probably work for some people, but not so much for me. The Spear Cuts Through Water, for example, also has this like slow burn romance plot over the course of the book, and it just works so much better, and it's much better integrated, and there's also a lot of other stuff going on in the book. I don't know. Anyway, I was thinking about that because I was reading this one, even though they're very different in many ways, because of those romance plots and how much better it works in the spear cuts through water. Okay, final physical book to talk about is Lost in the Garden by Adam Leslie. So in this book, reality is sick. It's set in a hot, sticky, endless summer. It's been summer for 6 years. Strange things have started to happen in these small British towns. Undead people are roaming the streets. Lots of people are dying. Lots of oddities are proliferating in the landscape and things. And it seems that only sort of young people are left in this world, cavorting through it with this abandon almost, because, you know, what is there left to live for in this deeply strange, lethargic summerish time. Everybody knows since they were kids not to go to a place called Almonby, which seems to be where the sickness is coming from. That is exactly what 3 girls find themselves doing, Heather, Rachel and Antonia, on one particular day. They are going there to find Heather's boyfriend, Stephen, who went there and never came back, and everybody who goes there never comes back. I don't read a lot of folk horror, but this is folk horror. It's got a really dreamlike feel to it. It's got a feel to it as if this would be the kind of thing you'd cook up, you know, in a feverish dream one hot summer day while you're lying in the sun. So there's a lot of dream logic. Again, may irritate some readers. Again, sometimes dream logic works for me, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, if you want a kind of fever dream of a novel, atmospheric and evocative, you might like this one. But again, I know I'm saying it a lot and you might be thinking maybe you just don't like longer books, but I do like longer books, but this is too long for the subject matter. It's just, it doesn't have enough plot to sustain it for this long. I also think he drops some interesting tidbits of, I don't know, mythology throughout or whatever is running underneath the book, but then it's very unsatisfactorily concluded. So that's a bit of a shame. I think this book is for a very niche kind of reader. I don't think I'm exactly its target audience. I think it does pretty well what it sets out to do, except for that ending. But yeah, I don't personally know many of the readers that would like this. But if it does sound like your kind of thing, it probably is. Okay, I inexplicably listened to The Ministry of Time because it had such a buzzy summer, and it is a sci-fi. And why it's got blurbs from Eleanor Catton and Max Porter, I do not know. I really don't know. It was read by everyone seemingly this summer, including people that don't read sci-fi. Need I say this is not a great example of the genre in terms of what it does like for literature as a whole. It started live as a romantic fan fiction about Victorian explorer Commander Graham Gore. I am not joking. It's obviously it's questionable in a number of ways. Again, it gets a little lost about 2/3 of the way through. The ending is somewhat ridiculous. I'm pretty sure the time travel stuff doesn't work. I was listening, but I don't think it works. The romance plot, not super satisfying, but I have to give her props because it was like kind of fun, silly, and it was certainly more enjoyable than reading, you know, Orbital or something like that. So anyway, it's about Graham Gore is removed from his timeline, put into our timeline. Apparently that's fine because he would have died in his timeline, so it's safe to bring him here. Can't even remember why they do that. And he's assigned a handler of sorts who is our protagonist, and she's supposed to acquaint Graham Gore with modern life. And I think Bradley does a good job of like actually creating some quite comical moments. Nothing you wouldn't expect, but out of Graham Gore, I think his characterization is probably like the best thing about this book. It's quite fun and silly. Some of the metaphors are like ridiculous, like so ridiculous that they are funny. Like the writing it's like overwrought, let's just say. And yeah, it's fun. It is deeply flawed in many ways. But if it sounds like the thing you need right now, then I think you could do much worse. Finally, we have The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard. This book really epitomises some of the things I least like about literary speculative crossovers, and actually quite a large swathe of current literary fiction in general. It's about Odile. She lives in a valley and she's like a teenager, and her mum wants her to get into the exclusive, elusive institution of the Conseil. And the Conseil rules over who can travel in and out of this valley. That's one of their roles. And the reason for that is because the valley represents a kind of time zone. So if you go to a valley in this direction, you're going to go into the past and see past version of yourself. And if you go into this valley in this direction, you're going to see the future. The reason they let people move between valleys at all is for like grief reasons. So this is an interesting enough concept, I suppose. But, and I talked about this a little bit in my written review, I am sceptical at the moment, and I'm sure I'll think of exceptions to this. I haven't yet thought of one though, to be fair, of world building where everything is like exactly the same. So Odile lives in like a small, we presume, French Canadian town, but like the landscape or the planet is completely different. And I don't know if this is just because of my own, the ways that I think about speculative fiction or like life, but humans are obviously very tied very specifically to the earth that we actually live on. So when I come across things like this, which are like a thought experiment like this, I'm thinking to myself, well, how many of these valleys are there? And do they proliferate into the distance? Like, where's the limits of the planet? Is there limits to the planet? And is it just a French Canadian town all across the planet? And how did this happen? You know, what's their history? Do they have a similar history to ours? How did they get there? How are they so human-like? How are they so us-like and their town so us-like if they evolved from a completely different way of life? It's a very literary approach to genre fiction where I would find that writers who write in the genre a little bit more are really thinking about those questions. They're really thinking about all the way down, like taking it all the way down. And maybe you'd come up with various different reasons why it's exactly like this specifically, but I don't think Howard has thought all of those through. And that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, I suppose, and it won't annoy readers in the same way as it annoys me. But I find if you are a genre reader and then you're reading some kind of literary crossover, that kind of thing probably will annoy you. That's not the only problem though. There are many more problems with this book. The romance plot, it's not even worth talking about. The grief plot or theme, I don't think it really adds anything. I just read a really good grief speculative book, which I'll talk about next, in the next video actually, which I think does good things. I don't see why it's literary at all. The prose style is nothing special. It's rendered in this very kind of flat, lifeless style, which seems to be popular with some writers at the moment. It's a bit dull, I suppose. Maybe that's why people think it's literary. Apparently it doesn't use speech marks, which I couldn't tell from listening, but obviously that might make it literary. It didn't even read as adult fiction sometimes, this book, but it's also kind of boring. So I don't know that I would give it to a young person. I'm not sure. The time travel didn't make a whole lot of sense to me personally. It gets caught in very boring institutions again, you know, just gets stuck there kind of with its not much of a plot going on. So yeah, it makes me a little bit ranty. It's not like a bad book, it's readable, but it just epitomises some of these issues I have with some of these books, you know. I think that one's a skip. I think pretty much every other book I would recommend to the right reader, or if you're in a particular kind of reading mood or whatever. But this one I think you could just safely actually skip it, for which I apologise. I hate saying that about someone's work, but I want you to spend your reading time wisely. So that is all the books. I can't believe we made it through. Thank you so much for watching today. I have added a silly amount of books to my library recently, which is not something I try and do outside of like birthdays, Christmas, whatever. But I actually have accumulated quite a lot of books recently, so I thought I would do a video on that soon. It'll be the end of November in about 5 minutes, so I'll be back with another book video soon, including chat about the Ursula Le Guin shortlist. And that's it. Well, thank you all so much for watching today, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!